Education of the North Carolina State Bar and remind the members of the board of CLE that they are hereby advised of their duty under the State Ethics in Government Act to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of a conflict, and are instructed to refrain from participating in any manner coming before the committee with respect to which there's a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict. Does any member of the board of directors anticipate any conflict of interest? None appearing, we will proceed with our introduction of our guests. Peter?
Yeah, so I don't have any great bios with me, so I was hoping maybe Karen and Dawn and Jade would briefly introduce themselves and their states, and in doing so kind of give us just a little summary of your department and your history with the CLE department in your states. I think would be great, and we are all so grateful that you're here and welcome to help to share your wisdom, as what we're doing here is trying to study our rules and see what changes, potentially significant changes would be beneficial for both the state bar and the lawyers in the state to make the whole process more efficient and more user friendly. And so we're glad that you're here, and I'll turn it over to you. Let's start with Karen, if you would introduce yourself and your state.
Sure. I'm Karen Litcher Johnson. I'm from Illinois. We started the program back in 2006. The rules were first adopted in late 2005. We have a staff of 10. We have 3 lawyers on staff, myself, the deputy director, and 1 other attorney who's in a senior position. We have a 2-year reporting period, and we have getting close to 100,000 attorneys who are licensed by the Supreme Court of Illinois.
Yeah. Wow. Let's go to Dawn. Would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Dawn McKnight. I'm a deputy regulation counsel. Our CLE organization is a little bit different here in that probably about, I want to say about 9 years ago, CLE and admissions used to be a separate standalone entity. It was still under the guidance of the Colorado Supreme Court, but it was a separate entity. It was brought under the Office of Attorney Regulation Council. So what we did at that time, I've been here about 5 years, is CLE became a part of the department that deals with attorney registration, and admissions became its own department under OARC. I oversee CLE registration and admissions. Like I said, I've been here about 5 years. But I was, prior to that, for 14 years at the Colorado Bar Association, continuing legal education as a CLE provider. And then as a licensed attorney, I've obviously had to comply with CLE for many decades. CLE has been a requirement here in Colorado since the early 1970s. Hasn't changed much since then. We did do some significant overhaul in 2018. Those were the first changes that the rules. Those are the first changes we made to the rules since the 1970s. So probably have some insight for you on what that was like. Our staff, since we do CLE and registration, that department has 6 staff members. 3 are primarily dedicated to CLE. Of that 6, I'm not included in that 6. But of that 6, 2 others, including myself, we do have CLE responsibilities. So, and it kind of just ebbs and flows during the year, depending on, the cycles between CLE and registration. We have, I think now close to 50,000, actively licensed. Obviously we have a lot more than 50,000 licensed in Colorado, but it runs anywhere between 40 and 50,000 actively licensed attorneys. And lately it's been crazy high. A number of people have gone active. So
wonderful. And Jade, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jade Priest-Mayos, and I am the MCLE program manager at the Oregon State Bar. My department is much smaller than Karen and Dawn's. We only have 15,000 active lawyers in Oregon, and my department manages the regulation and compliance with our MCLE rules and regulations, which exist by order of the Oregon Supreme Court. So it's just me and my assistant, Janelle. We have a separate department for admissions and a separate department for CLE seminars that creates and distributes CLE programming sponsored by our bar. I've only been in Oregon for 4 years. I practiced the law for many years in Manhattan and then for a little bit in Connecticut before I moved to Oregon 4 years ago. But since I've been in Oregon, we have completely changed our CLE department systems and operations, and evaluated and made many, many changes to our MCLE rules and regulations over the last 4 years. So that's was primarily my charge when I got here. So I can hopefully let you know how that went, the good and the bad.
Great. Well, once again, thank you. I think Deborah has sent you some of the questions that we had put together. Certainly, we're not going to be able to get to all of these today, but this would be a guide for us to get this conversation going. And anyone on the call from the committee, please feel free to jump in and ask any of your own questions, but I'll be happy to lead us through some of the questions that we've already put together. I sent the board from the CLE Reg Guide the breakdown of your states and the different requirements. So hopefully they've had a chance to look at those. And that was the impetus behind some of these questions. Now, I don't know if the guide is fully up to date, but that's what we use to try to prepare some of these questions. Just in general for all three of you, we're looking at these big changes, and so I guess for the two boards that have made recent changes, could you kind of just give a breakdown on some of the big changes that you made and what the shift was like and the impact of those shifts?
Well, I can take that in Illinois because we're in the midst of a fairly big change right now. We have been a self-reporting state where lawyers report every 2 years whether they've complied or they have an exemption. And we are transitioning right now. We're in what we call the course list stage, where lawyers can see the credits that they've taken from accredited courses. They can add what we call non-traditional credits, like writing law review articles, researching and writing published legal scholarly works. They can enter those themselves and they can view those credits. We just are wrapping up our first reporting period doing that. As far as initial reporting deadline is July 31st. And so far it's been extremely well received. Lawyers like seeing the credits that they have. So we're transitioning, and we may be going to a transcript system, which would mean that course list is their report. And we're looking forward to that very much. We're hopeful that the board and the court will give us the go ahead within the next few months to make that last step to the transcript system. We also did one other thing, not that far in the past, but we eliminated the complicated calculations of the credits lawyers needed to return to active status after being on inactive or retired. We used to have what was called deferred credits, and it was very complicated, and it was kind of on a rolling basis. So if we talked to you 6 months ago, the calculations and what reporting periods would be involved would be different as time went on. And we just changed it to whatever reporting period you come back active, you do those credits. And that's been very well received by attorneys. They just know what they have to do and when they have to do it by. We have a built-in, if somebody just keeps going retired at the end of the reporting period to try to get around doing credits, there is a catch-up provision where we say if you do that 3 reporting periods in a row, you have to do all 3 reporting periods. So there's a real strong disincentive to somebody trying to game the system. So those are we had some recent specialty credits added about 4 years ago in mental health, substance abuse, and diversity and inclusion. and we can talk more about those, but I would actively advocate that if you're considering adding more of those specialty type credits, to talk about it a whole lot more before you put the rules into place, so everybody knows what it is you're trying to accomplish and the steps you're going to take to try to accomplish your goals.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dawn or
So-
Jade? Okay.
Yeah, so in Colorado has always been a 3-year compliance period. Our attorney base is broken up into thirds. So when someone is admitted, they've got 3 full calendar years plus whatever the remainder of the year. So usually when they first get admitted, they have 3.5 years or 4 years. And then after that, it always runs 3 full years through December 31st. We've always been a self-reporting state. We've always been a transcript state. Attorneys have always been able to log in, well, at least for the last 20 years, been able to log in online to their transcript and enter in their courses. Significant changes in 2018 when I started here, even though attorneys were able to enter their courses online, attorneys were used to mailing them in. I had a staff person who did nothing but enter in affidavits, and that was over 80,000 affidavits a year. No one's allowed to mail them in anymore. If someone mails them in, we mail them back. And we tell them they got to enter them. Like, learn to use a computer. You're a lawyer. Okay. So, but we always allowed what we call reciprocity. And I know a lot of jurisdictions do that. That means that if a course has been accredited in another jurisdiction, we would automatically accept it. We eliminated that in 2018. I know everyone thought we were crazy by doing that. However, in Colorado, we are kind of odd. We're a 50-minute state, not a 60-minute state. And people find it difficult to do the math and figure out how to do the conversion in regards to credits. Also, there are some things that we don't accredit that are accredited in other jurisdictions. Like, we would never accredit a class on how to market your law firm, but if it was how to market your law firm ethically and ethics, it would be. So, we also found that at the end of the year that attorneys from out of state were just sending us all these affidavits or a printout of their transcript from their home jurisdiction and said, here you go, here's all my courses, interim. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're here for. Our staff were overwhelmed. So what we did, we eliminated reciprocity. And by doing so, when someone enters in their transcript is when we accredit a program, right? So we do compliance as well as accreditation. Every single program we accredit gets a program ID code. So when you go to your transcript, you select whether or not it was a live program or what we call home study, which means you'll pre-record it on demand. Then you select what it is, you put in that program ID code, it pops up, you claim your credits of if how much you've attended, and hit submit. It is an affidavit, you are swearing that you attended it in total. And so no one can enter anything now if they don't have that program ID code. That has made life a lot easier for us, most definitely. In order to balance that out for the folks who are out of state, we instituted comedy. There were several other jurisdictions that already have that. So we call it CLE compliance via comedy. Colorado has a significant military presence. A lot of folks get licensed here, get stationed somewhere else. It's helped a lot for military personnel, but also for folks. We have a lot of Texans and people from Wyoming who are licensed here. So basically what comedy is, you're in good standing in your home jurisdiction. Your home jurisdiction is where you live and work, and that is the address on file with us. If you're military personnel, that you are in compliance with one of the jurisdictions, even though you might be stationed elsewhere, or stationed overseas. It has been a huge success for out-of-state attorneys who are licensed here. And again, there was a really good exchange in eliminating reciprocity. Also, this was kind of controversial with our committee, but they allowed what they call independent study. It was something that we picked up from Texas. It allows an attorney to decide for themselves what they would like to. If they go to a course that's not accredited, but they feel that it contributes to their own professional development, they can submit for independent study up to 9 general credits in their compliance period. They cannot get ethics credit through independent study. And so when folks are trying to submit for something they've done elsewhere, that again, that gives us that compromise to say, we don't recognize reciprocity, but you can get credit for that through independent study. All the other sort of ways that you can get credits, whether it be pro bono, mentoring, writing, or writing legal research, teaching a CLE program. We do have forms that do get sent in to us. All those forms are very particular. That is still a somewhat manual process, even though we do have forms online for them to submit. But that's the only aspect that gets more in-depth review. And then we also, in 2018, allowed for law firm programs to be accredited. That was a restriction before, that if a program was totally self-contained within that law firm without outside individuals coming, that made a big difference. It definitely has made a big difference in our revenue, which I know you guys asked about. We also changed the age exemption. So prior to this, if you were 65 or older, even if you were on active status, you were exempted from taking CLE. The committee had recommended that the age exemption be removed entirely, that as long as you're on active status, you need to comply. The court came back and instituted age 72, which by chance happens to be the same year that you have to retire from the bench. So you have to take CLE up until age 72 if you're on active status, and after that you're exempt. So huge changes in 2018. It was a lot for a lot of the attorneys, but now we're just kind of in a role and in a system. And so, we've gotten through it. So it wasn't too bad.
Dawn, if I could do a quick follow-up on a question regarding the self-reporting of courses. Do you do any verification of those reports with the sponsors that can verify their attendance, or is it all just we're trusting that you're going to be telling the truth?
We're trusting you're going to tell the truth because, sort of one of the things that I think of is there's only a certain extent that you can regulate to the lowest common denominator, which will be the small percentage of people that we know are probably lying. But most attorneys, they think we know more than we do. Most are honest, very candid. We trust them. This has been the process for years. At the end of the day, we don't have time to micromanage and worry about if someone entered a code every 5 seconds while they're watching a CLE. We see the folks that really stress and really make sure that they meet it, their compliance. To be honest, the number of people we end up on makeup plans and end up suspending, you would think that it would be a lot lower if you believe that most people would lie. But it's actually quite high still, and people do take the time of day to submit their makeup plan, tell us how they're going to meet their compliance, and that gives us faith in the system that most of us are honest. Great,
thank you. Jade?
Well, Oregon has taken that honor system approach as well. We do require certification of the accuracy of the attorney's transcript by the attorney themselves, but we assume they're not going to lie. And we don't require codes, and we only end up suspending very few attorneys each year, though. It's pretty hard to get reinstated if you're suspended for MCLE noncompliance in Oregon, though. So we do a lot of outreach and try to help folks avoid being suspended. So as I said earlier, we have a lot of changes in the last 4 years. We went to a completely paperless online system for everything. So program accreditation applications are all electronic now. Attorney reporting is all electronic, and the way it works is our rules do require sponsors to report attendance, and sponsors can do that in 2 ways. They can either log into our system and key in the bar numbers for the program they're reporting attendance for, and then that will auto-populate those courses onto that attorney's electronic transcript. Or they can pay our bar a data entry fee of $1 per credit per attendee. So Most sponsors do this data entry on their own. Occasionally someone will pay us to do it for them. But we were having to hire temps during our busy season to do this data entry when we received the attendance reports from sponsors. And so for economic reasons, we shifted that burden to the sponsors, but offered to do it for free. They didn't want to take that on. Attorneys and sponsors can post credits to attorneys' transcripts. We also have firm administrator accounts where a law firm or organization with lawyers can appoint an administrator who we give permission to log in and access the MCLE transcripts of everyone in their organization. And they can do the reporting for the attorney as far as populating their transcript goes. Now, the attorney must log in personally and certify that their report's accurate and click the submit button. So the online reporting is going really well, in my opinion. It saved our bar a lot of money. It's actually become a revenue generating system because we do charge certain fees for uploading comedy certificates. We have comedy agreement with Washington, Idaho, and Utah. Attorneys can purchase comedy certificates of MCLE compliance through our system and the data entry fee. So we've actually generated money and saved staff expense with the system. As far as challenges with it, it's just opened my eyes to the fact that there's a big generational divide when it comes to anything electronic. I mean, we have folks who just don't want to log on to the computer, or they try to say they don't, which we know they do because they have to do electronic filing. So, and they must have an email on file with our courts. So we know they've got this capability, but they're resistant. And then we have younger folks who they don't even want to read their email. And I'm suggesting that we create some sort of text option for receiving reminders and alerts, maybe some QR codes to report your attendance instead of having to log in on your computer. I think Texas has a QR code system where the attorney can just take the photo of the QR code when they finish a class, and then that will automatically populate to their MCLE transcript. So, there's a lot of change going on in Oregon and MCLE, and I'm getting some resistance on these couple of things. I think it would be really beneficial, though, for the up and coming lawyers who really do operate in a little bit of a different technological day-to-day world than other lawyers who might be older generations. So I would just say, if you're making changes, my advice is to consider the whole spectrum of your bar members and how to accommodate everyone, because I think it's really incumbent on the bar to make sure their communication can be received by everyone. And just like it or not, a fact, different generations of lawyers communicate and receive communication effectively in different ways. So I would keep that in mind. Substantively, we have added the mental health substance use credit requirement. It's 1 credit. In Oregon, that means 60 minutes of instruction per year for every attorney. And the way we define mental health and substance use is it has to be a course that discusses how to identify mental health, substance use, and cognitive decline issues, and how those issues affect the practice of law. So this is not a drug court training course or how to be trauma-informed lawyering, or how to deal with your client who is an opioid addict. This is about lawyers and how to help your colleagues or yourself if these issues are affecting the practice of law. The other thing we require is access to justice. And the reason I'm bringing it up is not that that's changed recently, but changes are coming up in the access to justice potentially in Oregon, because we have this diversity action plan that gets revised and renewed every year. And this is coming up to be approved by our Board of Governors this July. And a part of the diversity action plan for the next 3 years in the MCLE task department is that we're going to review our access to justice requirements and determine whether they should be modified in any way. And this is stemming from a couple of years ago. I worked with our, we have a whole D&I department, of course, and we've got committees and groups that are working toward this cause. And I worked with them and collaborated with them to change the actual statement of purpose of our MCLE rules to include the rules. Of course, I can pull it up and copy it and put it in the chat if you're interested in the exact language, but of course, the MCLE purpose is to improve the skill and competence of lawyers, but also to increase their ability to provide legal services to all Oregonians. And so that connects the access to justice rules to our actual statement of purpose and makes it easier to expand those rules. Before, they seemed disconnected and just in the rules. Now they can effectively be seen to stem from the actual purpose of our rules. So over the next 3 years, we're going to be potentially making some changes to the access to justice rules. Another change coming up January 1st, 2022 is, so Oregon, we have a 3-year reporting cycle. Now, new lawyers, they have a very short reporting period, which is from their date of admission to April 30th, the following calendar year, and they have to do 15 credits during that period. Our Board of Bar Examiners and our MCLE Committee and Board of Governors and Supreme Court wanted these lawyers to get some practical education straight out of the gates. So we pushed them to do accelerated CLE in a short period of time. And that curriculum is a lot of practical skills courses, ethics, but specifically Oregon ethics, so they can start to learn the Oregon rules of professional conduct. And then after that, they go into the regular 3-year reporting cycle. Now, I've been, dealing with attorneys who are admitted by reciprocity over the last few years, and it just seemed like these guys are experienced. They shouldn't be forced to right away take 15 practical skills classes, and especially when they've just done coursework to be admitted by reciprocity. So I just propose that those folks be put directly into a 3-year reporting cycle when they're admitted, and that only the new attorneys who truly are new attorneys have to do this initial curriculum. So the court made that effective January 1st, simply to give our IT staff time to program that into our system so that we could administer that change. Now, I will echo something I think Karen said earlier, how important it is when you're making changes like this to have lots and lots of discussions with all the stakeholders. And I think probably the biggest pushback, at least in Oregon, is going to be from bar members and their staff who help them comply with your MCLE rules. And so our process to have a rule changed is someone proposes it. It could be me, it could be anyone. Goes to our MCLE committee, and the MCLE committee can make a recommendation one way or the other to our Board of Governors. Then it's presented to our Board of Governors. If the Board of Governors approves it, then we bring it to the Supreme Court because Supreme Court order is required to change our rules. So what we've started doing is between the Board of Governors meeting and the Supreme Court appearance, we will post the rules along with an explanation of them, the proposed changes, on our website, and we'll ask for public comment and feedback, and we'll leave it there for 60 days, depending how much time we have before we have to go to court. And that way we can tell our court we have gotten input from our bar membership, and this is how they feel about this change. They largely support it, or you know, in some instances they don't, and then we will do actual outreach to people who submit negative feedback and try to ask them what would help them get on board with this. And so then we can tell the court, and this is the solution we found. So in our implementation process, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. And now these people who weren't on board say they're comfortable with the change. It just makes it easier. It makes it obviously so the court knows you've done your due diligence, and the court knows how the bar membership feels about what you're requesting. So that's been really helpful for us in our process.
Thank you. I'll open it up to any questions from the board, and then I was thinking maybe we would start talking about the multi-year reporting and a few questions related to that. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask at this time? Okay, so one of the items that we're considering is a move to a multi-year reporting period.
Hey,
right now
Peter.
we are, oh yes, Bert?
Are we missing, we have one more presenter, don't we?
I don't believe so. I think all three have talked to us about this process.
Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't know if the first, okay. All right, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem, no problem. We're looking at potentially moving to a multi-year reporting period. Right now, we are 12 hours every year, and that requires a certification every year. And as you might imagine, doing 30,000 of those every year is a lot on Deborah and the staff. And when the rules were put in place, we had about half of that number in the 80s. And so it definitely seems to be a need to split this up in a way that's more efficient, and also give lawyers some more flexibility on getting their hours completed. So I did have some questions related to the multi-year reporting period. One is how you make the initial split into the reporting period. Is it? I know that at least one of you is I think Illinois is alphabetical. Does that change if someone's name changes, or is it their name when they are admitted? And then how do you deal with reinstated members or people who claim exemptions in the middle of a reporting period? Is that effective for all of their years? Just kind of those questions that pertain to the multi-year period. We'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Karen, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I have dogs and sometimes they bark, so I mute myself. We have a 2-year reporting period. We had talked at some point on a staff level of going to 1 year for various reasons with the transcript and everything. That was not a well-received suggestion from attorneys that we spoke with. They were not interested at all in that. So I think it's a good idea to consider a 2-year, maybe even a 3-year. I know Colorado does 3. For us being 2-year, we are A to M, N to Z. If I had my druthers, I was not on staff. There was no staff when that was chosen. Instead, I would have gone with your registration number ends with odd, you report in odd years. If it ends with even, you report in even years, if you're going to go to a 2-year. For us, A to M is a much larger group than our N to Z folks. We're at about 60%, 40%. Apparently nobody counted up how many people would be in each group. I can't say that for sure, but it sure looks like it. So we do have a little bit of an imbalance. If you can even it out so your reporting periods are a similar number of lawyers, I'd encourage that. On the name changes, we have, you have 2 groups of people, those who are already admitted when you do this, and then those who are coming in. The folks who are coming in, it's relatively straightforward. It's just they're in a compliance group. Their compliance group does not change after they're admitted. For those folks who are already members of your bar, we picked a date when we got started. So in other words, July 1 of 2006, I believe was the date. Whatever your name was on June 30 of 2006, that was it. Your name was forever for compliance purposes. I will tell you, some folks did not like that because they were in the process of getting divorced and hated their soon-to-be ex-spouse, wanted to never see the name. So we eventually just changed it to your compliance name was either A to M or N to Z. So people didn't have to see a name that they may not be happy seeing. When folks come back, it'll depend on where they are in their reporting period. Obviously, we don't require like partial hours. We think that's complicated. The attorney makes the choice on when they want to come back. So if it's late in the reporting period, they can always ask for additional time. If it's extraordinary or extenuating circumstances, it's $100 to ask for an extension of your deadline for 90 days. If they needed that, it was a financial hardship, or, hey, I know it's June 20th, the reporting deadline's June 30th, but I just found this great job and they want me to get an Illinois license right away, and I don't have the time to complete the credits before June 30th, et cetera. You know, we would consider that as an extraordinary or extenuating circumstance. We have not had that issue yet because we just made that change recently to not have the deferred complicated credits, but just go with, if you came back in the reporting period, you do all the credits. That's been very well received so far by attorneys who would need to do it. What we've found is a lot of people think about it for a very long time. There's a lot of, hi, can we talk about me coming back to practice? And then you explain how many credits they need and the deadlines. And then 6 months later, they're calling you again. And then one time I was talking to a lady and I'm thinking to myself, gee, I wonder I should look at her notes. She had called us 4 times already to calculate her credits because her deadline kept changing on when she personally wanted to come back. So I just encourage you to use a simple system. I think it works out the best that if you're going to come back, you just do that reporting period's credits. And if you need additional time, you know, those 1 off, 2 off, maybe a dozen people a reporting period needed, we can handle that as a staff.
Karen.
Sure. Hi, Bert.
Hey, how are you? And yes, I was paying attention to you when you were speaking. I was just, I was thinking something else.
Don't worry, don't worry.
I got 2 questions for you. One is, what are your CLE specialty requirements for a 2-year period?
It's 6 hours total for professional responsibility out of the 30 that are needed. So you need 30 hours in those 2 years, and of those 30, at least 6 have to be professional responsibility. Now, professional responsibility for us is defined as certain categories. We added mental health, substance abuse, diversity and inclusion, those 2 topics, as specialty credits within professional responsibility. So every year, what we call the specific 6 professional responsibility is 1 hour mental health and substance abuse, 1 hour diversity and inclusion, and 4 hours of any area in professional responsibility. So you could do 5 hours in mental health and substance abuse, 1 hour in diversity and inclusion, you'd meet your professional responsibility requirement. So those 4 can be anything as long as you do the 1 and the 1 that we call specialty credits.
Yes, ma'am. And my second question is, you said it was a 2-year and y'all talked about doing a 1 year.
Yeah.
And the attorneys didn't like it. Was there any ever talk about going from 2 to 3? Was there any pro-con discussion about that? Because I see that Oregon and Colorado are both 3, and so I just that is a discussion that we've been having as to whether we should go if we do go multi-year 2 and 3. And I was just trying to see the pros and cons. Thank you.
No worries. We did not discuss going to 3 years. We have certain complexities. We have rely a lot on a database system. We have 1,800 course providers. And so we have databases for both our attorneys to report online, for our providers to enter courses and enter attendance. I also wanted to mention that we're a little bit unique in that we must generate our own revenue. We do not get any revenue from registration fees, anything. And our rules specifically say that the course providers are the ones that should be bearing most of the responsibility for supporting the system financially. So we do have lawyer late fees, but providers do carry the load on financially supporting the board.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Karen, that leads, into a good, another good question for Jade and Dawn as they talk about their multi-year reporting. When we get with a 3-year period, some of the concerns that we've been thinking about are we going to end up with half of the, or a third of our lawyers having to do 30 hours of CLE in the last 3 weeks because they haven't done anything in 3 years, and is that really good for maintaining confidence that you don't do anything for 2 or 2.5 years and then you do it all in a half-year period? So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
I've not seen that. I've been involved with CLE in Colorado now for over 20 years. And, most people, there's an opportunity cost, right? Whether or not a program is a credit for CLE or not. I know, we get these stupid programs where they get upset if we deny it for CLE and they're like, oh, no one's going to come because it's not worth CLE. No, people aren't going to come if it's not a program that's worth their time to not meet their billable hours to come sit there for an hour or two to go through your program, right? And so, I'm a strong believer that most attorneys really care a lot about their own professional development. They choose programs for a lot of different reasons, whether or not it's going to help them in their practice. I saw where folks would do it just because they've got a new issue that come up and they kind of use it as part of their legal research, right? So they'll take bits and pieces of a conference. I think the 3-year reporting cycle works really well because we do have folks that do go to big conferences or institutes, whether or not it's the local, the Colorado Bar Association, Real Estate Institute every single year. I mean, those substantive practice area ones, folks who are really sort of the niche practice, they're picking up their CLE because they're going to that. And whether or not, you can do, this is something that's unique about Colorado as well. Colorado has never had a restriction on the number of hours that you need to do live versus what we call home study. And that might be what you've referenced here as self-study, but it's not uncommon, right? Our Colorado Bar Association submits a program. It's a live program. It's going to be 1 day. They submit a program accreditation for the 1 day live webinar webcast. So they're webcasting it because we've got a lot of remote areas in Colorado. People aren't going to be driving from the Western Slope to come to Denver to sit in on a program. And if they do, they resent it. And then they record it, and that's called a home study. So they'll do 3 program submissions. That's 3 fees. Right? Each gets their own unique
so they're all
ID.
separate. Okay.
It's all separate. Yeah. That allows us also. So, we don't allow carryover credit. I know that was one of the questions. Why? It's a 3-year compliance period. I can see why a jurisdiction has carryover credit if it's a 1-year reporting period. Someone goes to some big program, maybe another one at the end of the year. It's more than they need. They want credit for the next year. Over 3 years, there's no reason to have carryover credit. It's never existed. So the people who complain are the folks who are trying to get used to Colorado rules because they're from somewhere else. But it's never been an issue. I believe that since the 3-year compliance period was started from the very beginning, the bar was just split within a third. And how they did that division from the very beginning, I'm not sure. Each pool is fairly even. Obviously, now it goes just based on the date of admission. I get sworn in today. I go 3 full years through December 31st. So I'm going to have 3.5 years for my first compliance period, right? Because it's always going to go through December 31st of the 3rd full calendar year. And then after that, it's just always 3 full years. What disrupts that? We have only one exemption. That's age exemption. Exemption means you do not need to do CLE and need to comply with CLE. And again, that's if you're 72 or older and still on active status. Obviously, anyone on inactive status doesn't need to do CLE. What we have are what we can consider deferrals. Military personnel who get deployed to a war zone or to an overseas location where they're unable to comply with their CLE, they can reach out to our office and we discuss with them how long their deployment is going to be and how long they can defer. That may or may not kick them into another compliance period, especially if they're deployed for 6 months to a year. Obviously, the last thing they're thinking about is CLE. But suspension, so you're going to have either an administrative suspension, which will be for non-compliance of CLE or not doing your annual attorney registration fee and compliance statement, or your discipline suspension, right? So any of those type of suspensions from the practice of law. The deferral from CLE is based on the length of that suspension. So if you have been suspended for less than a year, you stay within your same compliance period. So if you're planning on going back to an active license, you better still keep thinking about your CLE. Now, obviously, for some of those folks, that's the last thing they're probably thinking about. They come back, maybe they're at the very end of their compliance period or their compliance period just ended. They've got 91 days to then complete their CLE without there being any penalties. If someone's suspended, right here, we call it a year and a day, right? They usually have to go through a reinstatement process, suspended for a year and a day, your CLE cycle gets reset from the date of the time that you get reinstated, 3 full years out, depending whenever that is. So anyone less than a year, they still stay within their CLE compliance period. And again, only military personnel are the ones that end up usually getting a deferral. They still have to comply at some point. And so in terms of a 3-year compliance period, we start sending reminder notices 8 months prior to the end. So folks have been getting a monthly reminder notice from us. Obviously with the transcript system, we can check and say, and the notice just says, according to our records right now, you're not yet in compliance with your CLA. Don't forget your CLA compliance period ends this year, December 31. So they get that every single month. Because Colorado has been on e-filing for a million years, from the time that I was in private practice, everyone has to have an email address on file with us. It is required by court rule. And so everyone is getting those reminder notices by email to the official email address that they registered with us. They also have the opportunity when they do their annual registration to give us some backup. We do get, some other email addresses for folks. And so we'll also send notices to those emails as well if we're getting bounce backs or, we see that they haven't responded at all after we're about ready to suspend them. Obviously at that point, they're getting a written notice from us. But that annual, we could tell all of a sudden by the number of people who get complied, we see chunks of them. On the affidavits for all the programs, we have the link there telling specifically you need to get online. Our regs say, report attendance within 10 days. We know they don't always do that. The sponsors are really good about letting people know that. And some of the really big providers, like Colorado Bar Association, within your own dashboard, you can track when you've attended a program. They've got a link that takes you directly to logging into your transcript, and they send reminder notices as well. So a lot of the sponsors, we've really tried to train them and get them to continue to push people to register on to report online. Again, that was because we just couldn't continue to process all these hard copy affidavits that people wanted to mail in. And even though our admissions numbers can kind of ebb and flow ever so slightly each year, there isn't a huge difference. So each pool stays somewhat the same. We don't have anything that's sort of out of whack compared to the other two. And so I don't see that that's been an issue at all each year in the number of people that we're handling in regards to compliance. This year, so the way our process works is Their compliance period goes through December 31. I could be taking my classes. Yes, maybe I've delayed. I bought some cheapy system for 99 bucks. I could do all 45 hours. And I decided the last week of December, I'm not going to practice law. I'm going to do CLE for a week. I get all my CLE done. I have until the end of January to report it online. If anyone takes a course that's in January, but their compliance period ended in December 31st, that's considered late compliance. They've got to pay a late fee. If they don't have their credits reported to us in compliance by the end of January, they have, and they know, I'm not going to be in compliance. They file what's called a makeup plan, and they have to tell us what they plan to do and comply by middle of May. So they've got a few more months, but they have to give us a plan, and that plan has to be approved. We make sure that it's accredited programming, that it's the number of credits that they need. We sign off on it. That makeup plan, they have to pay a filing fee of $200. So non-compliance group one is didn't comply, didn't send us a makeup plan. They didn't do anything. They ignored us. Boom, their list is going to the court. They're the first round of suspensions. That first round of suspensions this time was around 200 people, right? Out of over 10,000, 15,000 people. That's, it's not that much. Second group would be, I've submitted my makeup plan to you. I've never reported to you that I actually completed it. So they have to report to us then by the middle of June that they've actually completed their makeup plan. They submit their affidavit. Ideally, our committee is supposed to meet in August to then review that list. Like this year, no one has time in August, so we're meeting in September. By the time we get to September, they'll all be complied. Right now, we have like 50 people, and we get hundreds of makeup plans. And depending on when they file it, it's if it's a timely filed plan, it's $100. If it's a late filed plan, it's $200. By the time, so we've had hundreds of them. We've got 50 people right now who haven't let us know that they've timely complied. We're sending out notices to all of them to let them know that their name will be submitted to the court for consideration for suspension. We'll hear from them all in the next few weeks as soon as they get that letter. And so, usually by the time we get to that point, we're not suspending anyone. What happens is then when they come into compliance, that's when their compliance starts again. It doesn't reset. They now have less than 3 years, right? Because the longer they're taking to come into compliance, they're eating into this year. And so they say they came into compliance today, July 23rd, we marked them complied, we set it. They now have 2 years and 5 months. That's it. And so those folks who late comply, they're not even extending, it doesn't reset them, it doesn't kick them into another compliance year. The only time that's going to happen are all these folks now that are suspended for CLE if they stay suspended for more than a year. So I've been dealing with a lot of petitions, what they have to do once they get suspended. I've been dealing with a lot of petitions for reinstatement. They have to show how they've come into compliance. We confirm that they have the courses that they've taken, we approve. We then have to submit, I have to certify it, file a petition with the court to reinstate them to practice law. And once that reinstatement order comes back from the court, then their CLE compliance date starts again as that date. But again, it's not a reset. They've just lost several months into their compliance period. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like,
Dawn.
Yeah.
It's Bert again. I'd be remiss to ask you, I see that your EDI requirement is starting now or coming into compliance in a couple of years. The process itself, was it great resistance? Was it smooth sailing? Was it much compromise? And you don't have to spend too much on it, but we are trying to do our very best to address this at this moment. And I was just curious.
So we've always approved diversity and inclusivity programming as general. And so usually for accreditation, our debate with national providers has always been it needs to be ethics. And our previous rule always was that It could be ethics if you dealt with, say, like 8.4, that's usually the one that's implicated the most, especially in our jurisdiction. So the committee started working on an EDI requirement actually back in 2019. But at the same time, another group was wanting a specific requirement dealing with professionalism and civility. They came up with this whole list of stuff that was, again, like tangential to the rules of professional conduct. So our rule was very specific for ethics is rules of professional conduct, judicial code, or specific legal requirement that you needed to abide by ethically as an attorney. Very, very narrow. So folks really wanted to start expanding that. Another group started meeting and they wanted lawyer wellness or lawyer well-being as a mandatory requirement. So all these were hitting. The CLE committee was trying to constantly stay on top of all of this because movements have often taken place outside of that committee, which they've resented, pro bono and mentoring being two of them. And so what ended up happening was last year, it's called the President's Diversity Council. All the local specialty bars and the Colorado Bar, all the presidents created this committee, President's Council, and they started pushing for an EDI requirement. That allowed the CLE subcommittee that we have under the Supreme Court to get that momentum they felt they needed and the others to kind of slow down. Because the court was like, folks are not going to be receptive to mandatory requirements. So that gave them that momentum. Lots of research. We met with many jurisdictions. We met with Karen many, many times. The committee did. The majority of the bar was in support of it. Membership of the Colorado Bar Association, which is a voluntary bar, but does have a significant membership base. They were supportive. There was definitely some vocal individuals who challenged it. So the court, whenever there's a rule change, has a public hearing. We saw stuff come in that were like full-on briefs. You could tell that these were briefs that probably came from other jurisdictions that got kind of tweaked. It was a really long public hearing. I think we had like 28 people present. But I would say 3/4 of the folks that presented that day were in favor of the change. And what's interesting is they were hanging up on the word equity. But our committee was very adamant that equity had to be the forefront of diversity and inclusivity, that equity is the umbrella. And so they did a presentation about how that falls under equity and that their fears of what equity meant, et cetera, were unfounded. So because everyone could file the public comments ahead of time, individuals were ready to sort of, in their oral comments, were able to sort of present what they needed to address a lot of the concerns. And I think, obviously the court felt comfortable with it. What I thought was interesting is the definition for EDI was much more expansive. What was submitted by the court, it was submitted by the committee. We actually, as staff, asked them to have specifics within the proposal that made it clear how to define EDI. The court came up with this really bland statement. It's a really generic sentence, which has left us in limbo now. Because we weren't sure if they were rejecting the specificity that was being proposed or not. So that would definitely be, I think, goes to what Karen had mentioned earlier in being prepared in regards to accreditation, because we're dealing with those issues now. I think maybe the court did that in response to concerns that came in the comments regarding how things were being defined, and maybe just leaving it broader or just more generic was easier, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Jade, I'm very aware of everyone's time here, and I know we scheduled this for an hour meeting. So I don't want anyone to feel like they need to stick around, and we might, I think the board would benefit from bringing you back if we can find another time to schedule to ask some questions on some different areas. But if anyone wants to stick around, if you're willing to stick around and answer some questions, we might ask a few more now, and then reschedule for maybe another meeting where we can talk about some issues regarding attendance fees and some other areas that we're talking about. But I'd love to hear you give us your thoughts on the 3-year period and how that works for Oregon. Yeah.
Sure. So similar to Dawn, we haven't noticed that there's a large number one year and a small number another year, and we do it the same way. You know, it depends when you're admitted. You're put into this rotation. Now, if you're suspended or you voluntarily change your status to something other than active, you don't have a MCLE requirement then. If you're reinstated and your 3-year reporting period has not lapsed, you then just go back into it and you continue to have the same reporting deadline and the same requirements as if you were never suspended or inactive. If your reporting period lapsed while you were not active, then when you reinstated, we assign you a small short reporting period similar to the new lawyer reporting period, which goes from your date of reinstatement to April 30th the following calendar year. And again, it's 15 credits during that short reporting period. And it's not as involved as the new lawyer curriculum. It's just 15 credits that includes 2 ethics and 1 mental health hour, and the rest can be whatever you like. But this is because if someone's out of practice for a long time and then they come right back, now if they're going to be put into a 3-year cycle, they can now go 3 more years plus all the time they were inactive without doing any education. And not sure if you're aware, but in Oregon, we have professional liability fund, which is a mandatory malpractice insurance that all Oregon lawyers are required to pay into who are in private practice. And so the professional liability fund it's a separate organization than the bar, but they're connected to the Oregon State Bar. And so we have quasi-internal pressure to help prevent attorneys from committing malpractice. And so that's essentially why our rules are shored up in a way to try to avoid long periods of time without doing continuing legal education. And why we require brand new lawyers to do some quick learning right out of the gates, and also why our ethics rules are defined so narrowly. Our ethics accreditation standard is defined so narrowly. We don't include access to justice or diversity, equity, inclusion, or mental health in our definition of ethics for accreditation purposes. For a course to count as ethics credit, the course has to be really devoted to legal ethics and discuss the actual ethics rules or our court approved statement of professionalism. So these are very rule specific courses. And I wasn't here when that definition was created and that standard was created, but I have to imagine our professional liability fund pushed for heavy ethics rule education ongoing to reduce their claims. So that's how we address the in and out, active to inactive or suspended. And you know, the 3-year reporting period works great for us because we end up with a small group of only 5,000, give or take a little each year. And you know, we're dealing with such a small number relative to some other bars that I just think that margin, if we end up with more one year than another reporting, you know, that margin ends up being still a small number relative, because it's just going to be 100 or 200 more lawyers, not thousands like it would be in bar with 200,000 lawyers.
Right.
So that's worked out fine for us, just based on date of admission.
Wonderful. I think maybe it would be best for us to wrap up now, just since we promised everyone it was going to be an hour meeting, and I don't want us to keep going unless anyone has any questions that they want to ask today. I think we might be inclined to ask you back at some point to talk about areas related to specialty credits and how you give credits to things like pro bono and mentoring and bar service that it seems that your states, some of your states do in different areas. We certainly also would want to talk about application fees and how you see that, how that's worked for you related to revenue, and if your fees have changed or had to increase over time, and how that has worked. I'm certainly very interested in that. And then and some states, as regards to online and on-demand courses, the requirements for interactivity and verifying that people are actually paying attention, and how that process might work. So there's a lot of questions that we still have, and I think everyone is benefiting from this, but I don't want to keep you guys here longer than what we had scheduled. Does anyone on the committee have any final questions for today? Okay,
So Peter,
great.
what I
Yep.
could do is, on some of these, I probably could just do a really quick answer for you guys that might be helpful. And also just want to let you guys know that, you know, we did change our fees. We changed our fees twice, but when we did a complete overhaul of our rules and regulations in 2018, I had it's just so that you guys have an idea. Prior to the rule change, our CLE department revenues were around $330,000. Our fiscal year runs July to June. End of this fiscal year that just ended in June 2021, our revenue was $736,000. So,
And what do you attribute mostly to that? Yeah, what do you attribute mostly to that increase?
Getting rid of reciprocity and having what we call certified providers that pay an annual fee of $2,500 and then a reduced fee for each program accreditation that they send. And that made a huge change because, you know, it is not uncommon for us to get a list from the ABA or Aliaba, any of those, PLI, law.com. We will get a list of anywhere from 500 to 800 courses at a time that before all would have been accepted under reciprocity. No one ever, these big national providers wouldn't get their programs accredited here because they didn't need to. Mm-hmm. Only this local, so the burden fell on the Colorado Bar Association and all the specialty bars, the local bars that had programs here in Colorado, because our rules were specific that if the program was held in Colorado, it had to be accredited. So all these other providers, the rest of the country, didn't submit here. And we weren't able to pay for our staff. Now we generate plenty of revenue to pay for our staff and our overhead that we need for the department. And it's funding us getting a complete overhaul of our database, which we're in the middle of doing right now. And so it made a huge difference. We definitely, yes, heard some squawking from people, but when we explained it to the attorneys that we're shifting the burden to the sponsors and they need to do it, all of a sudden, thousands of programs coming in that before we were manually entering in and receiving no fees for. So big difference.
And right now in North Carolina, we do not have any application fees at all. And so there is no burden. There's no limit to the number of courses that anyone could submit for approval. There's no cost at all. And what we have is a attendance fee, a credit hour fee of $3.50 per hour. That's either paid by the sponsor or if the sponsor doesn't pay, then due by the lawyer. And so it is a fixed revenue in the sense that, you know, you're likely to get at least 12 times $350 from every lawyer because that, you know, has to be paid. But the burden of reviewing and accrediting courses on our staff is not offset at all by any type of fee. And so, you could submit 1,000 courses, some of these national providers, knowing that, 50% of them, no one's going to take it, and we have to go through the work to approve it. And we don't get would never get any revenue or offset of cost for having to do that. So we're really looking hard at switching to an application fee system, and potentially away from the attendance fee system, and would love at some point to talk with you guys about how that works.
Sounds good. And each jurisdiction so we do a flat fee, but some jurisdictions, Jade, I don't know what you do. You guys, if you do per credit hour, I think Texas does per credit hour. But we
have a tiered structure where if it's a course up to 4 hours long, you can submit your application for a fee of $40. If your course is 4 1/4 up to 8 hours, it's $75. Anything over 8 hours is our $125 application fee. We do offer a discounted rate of $25 for any application that's 1 hour or less, offered for free to all Oregon bar members, just to encourage free programming for our lawyers. And we will waive a member's obligation to pay that application fee if it's a member applying. If that program was an out-of-state program and that bar member was the only Oregon bar member that they're aware of who attended it, because, we don't want to punish our bar members for going and incurring the expense of having good quality, of attending a good quality program that the sponsor's not inclined to apply for accreditation in Oregon, understandably, because it's not really meant to be a CLE course in every state or
right.
whatever.
Yeah, we allow individual attorneys to submit. It's called a Form 1B. And again, it's to, like, someone who goes to DC to go to a bankruptcy institute, but it's specific for that attorney. And it's only a $15 fee that the attorney pays, and we'll accredit it only for that attorney. So if they end up going there and there's other Colorado attorneys there, they all have to submit, because we didn't want to create a loophole where, again, these providers force the burden back on the attorneys because they know that they have that workaround. So.
Well, and that's interesting because that's what's happened. I originally, the reason this free if you're the only member who went to the program is because we in our public comment window got so much pushback about from attorneys who were now going to have to start paying application fees, that this was the exception that we carved out, and they really take advantage of it because rather than have to prove that they were the only one who went, it's the honor system. I don't know of anyone else who went. Well, if it's an online class, an on-demand virtual class, it's easy to say you didn't look and see who was there, or
yeah.
No
So
one
just
else
a heads
around.
up, there's a lot of nuances to fees in the way that in every jurisdiction there's a lot of different nuances to it all. So
I don't think
yeah.
I think I agree with you, Dawn, that the lawyers are honest when it comes to whether they did their coursework, but they are not as honest when it comes to whether they qualify for fee reductions.
I agree with that. Yeah. I would definitely agree with that.
Pay. Now, we're a compulsory bar, so they're already mad that they have to pay us annual fees. So maybe in other states it would be less of an issue, but the attorneys do not want to pay accreditation application fee.
Yeah. We got pushed back at first for the $15, but we don't now. It's pretty seamless. And so, but I could, a lot of these questions are pretty quick answers to, but I think probably some of your more in-depth ones could take a whole hour, all the different nuances.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, if you take a look at those questions and could answer them quickly, via email or something, we'll share it with the board, and that would be really helpful. Anything that you feel like answering, and then we'll take a look and we'll discuss as a board and see what other areas maybe we want to come back and discuss. But I really we all really appreciate your time and experience here. It's been very helpful. I think hearing the real world effects of the issues we're discussing is going to be really beneficial for the board. And so we all just want to thank you for being here today and sharing, giving us your time and wisdom, and we'll be in touch.
All right.
Thank you, ladies.
Sure thing.
George,
Bye,
I think
everyone.
Bye. Bye,
that
Jane.
ends the Q&A. If we can wrap up, I believe, and maybe we'll schedule a get together with look at everybody's schedule for sometime in August to have another meeting.
And any feedback that we get from our guests, I'm sure you'll share with the members of our board. So unless anyone has anything else to bring before the board, I'll declare the meeting adjourned.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.